There's a reason why some of the most powerful visions are born in silence. A dream, especially in its earliest stages, is like a seed. It carries all the potential for life, for expansion, for impact. But it is delicate. It doesn't need noise. It needs depth. And most of all, it needs protection. One of the most dangerous things you can do with a dream is to expose it too soon, to place it into the hands or ears of those who haven't earned the right to hold it. Because when you do, you don't just share an idea. We often confuse inspiration with invitation. That moment of internal fire, the spark of a dream, feels so potent that we want to speak it into the world immediately. We crave confirmation, applause, reassurance. But dreams are not meant to be validated. They are meant to be lived. And the more you talk about them, the more they begin to dissolve into performance rather than purpose. Carl Jung wrote about the difference between the persona and the self, the mask we wear to meet the world, and the inner truth that we often hide, even from ourselves. When you speak your dream too soon, it becomes a persona. You begin to shape it to match the reactions of others. You filter it, you shrink it, you edit your vision to fit their comfort, and slowly you lose connection to its original energy. You see, a dream doesn't need an audience. It needs solitude. Solitude to grow in its original form without interference. Because in those early moments, what you're carrying isn't just an idea, it's a psychological blueprint. It is your psyche's attempt to guide you into the next version of yourself. It holds within it your desire, your calling, your unexpressed potential. But when you expose it prematurely, you invite people who cannot see beyond their own limitations to offer commentary on something they were never meant to understand. And that's the tragedy. How often people abandon their dreams not because they lack the discipline to pursue them, but because they opened their mouths before they built their foundation. They gave voice to something that needed time in the dark, time to take root, time to grow thick enough skin to withstand scrutiny. Just as a seed requires darkness before it sees the sun, so too do your dreams require silence before they meet the world. There's also a psychological truth. That's how potential gets wasted, when it's talked to death before it's ever walked. But what if you kept it to yourself? What if you allowed your vision to marinate in stillness, to grow strong roots in the soil of your own mind and heart? You would begin to notice something profound. You would move differently. You would create without hesitation, without explaining. You would walk with conviction, not commentary. You would align your behavior with your purpose, not with external approval. And in doing so, your dream would begin to transform you, not into someone who seeks attention, but into someone who radiates authenticity. Because now you're not seeking validation, you're becoming the embodiment of your vision. You're living the dream, not talking about it. Eventually, yes, the dream will speak, but not through words, through your presence, through the results, through the quiet strength of someone who stayed the course, even when no one was clapping. Let your work be your testimony. Let your silence be your sanctuary. Because when the dream is real, it doesn't need to be announced. It just needs to be lived. So protect what is sacred. Keep it close. Water it in private. And when it's strong enough to face the world, it will no longer need explanation. Because what is born in silence will never beg for validation. One of the most sobering realizations you'll face as you begin to grow is this: not everyone can handle your dream. And I don't mean that in a romanticized or dramatic way. I mean it in a very real psychological sense. Because when you share your dream, what you're actually doing is revealing your inner landscape, your desires, your beliefs, your ambition, and ultimately your willingness to live a life beyond what is familiar. And not everyone is ready to hear that. In fact, most people don't listen with vision, they listen with fear. Fear, by nature, resists expansion. It clings to what's known. So when you tell someone your dream, their response often says more about their limitations than about your potential. They will measure your dream against their own experiences, their failures, their regrets, their self-imposed ceilings, and what you meant as a sacred offering, a spark of hope or imagination, gets processed through their filter of fear. They don't see your dream as possibility, they see it as a threat to their comfort. Carl Jung spoke about the collective unconscious, the deep pool of shared human experience that shapes how we think, feel, and behave, often without our awareness. And in that unconscious space, most people have been conditioned to play small, to survive, to follow convention. So when you show up with a vision that breaks patterns, that challenges norms, that dares to say, I want more, you trigger something in them, not admiration, not support, but discomfort, even resentment. This is why sharing your dream prematurely can be dangerous, not just for your progress, but for your psychological clarity. You may begin with confidence, excitement, a pure fire inside you, but then someone you trust raises an eyebrow. They laugh. They say, "That's unrealistic." Or worse, they say nothing at all, just a silence so loud you start questioning your own mind. And slowly, the dream that once felt so alive becomes something you tiptoe around. You start editing it, diminishing it. You tuck it away not because it wasn't possible, but because someone else's fear made it feel foolish. Here's the truth: most people aren't equipped to hold space for your dream because they've never held space for their own. They've buried their visions under obligation, under fear, under layers of societal conditioning. So when they hear yours, it stings. It reminds them of what they abandoned in themselves. And in that moment, they don't mean to harm you, but they will. Not through cruelty, but through the quiet, subtle drip of discouragement that wears away at your inner resolve. This is why discernment is essential. You must become extremely selective with whom you allow into your sacred vision, not out of arrogance, but out of spiritual self-respect. A dream is not a piece of gossip. It's not casual conversation. It's a fragment of your future reaching back to guide you. It doesn't belong in the mouths of people who cannot see past the horizon of their own limitations. Protect it like you would a newborn. You wouldn't hand a newborn baby to someone with dirty hands. Why hand your dream to someone with a contaminated mindset? Before you speak, ask, does this person think expansively? Are they capable of supporting without projecting? Have they done their own inner work, or are they still operating from fear and judgment? If the answer is no, stay silent. Not because you're hiding, but because you're preserving something too valuable to be misunderstood. There's a deep psychological strength in keeping your dream to yourself until it's strong enough to survive criticism. When you hold it close, you give it room to mature, to clarify, to align with your deeper self. You stop looking outward for approval and start looking inward for guidance. And the more you trust that inner voice, the less you need anyone else to confirm what you already know. Eventually, your dream won't need defending. It won't need explaining. It will manifest. And in that moment, the same people who couldn't see it will finally recognize it. But by then, their opinion won't matter, because you have already built what they couldn't even imagine. So when in doubt, remember this: people don't hear your dream, they hear their fear. Don't let their fear become the lens through which you see your future. Silence isn't secrecy, it's wisdom. There is something quietly corrosive about inviting too many voices into the sanctuary of your vision. At first, it seems harmless, even responsible. You think, I just want feedback, or maybe someone else can help me refine it. But with each opinion, with every suggestion or subtle doubt, your dream shifts ever so slightly. It becomes less about your soul's direction and more about managing expectation, less about intuitive alignment and more about crowd approval. And before you realize it, what once felt like a deep inner calling begins to feel like a performance. Carl Jung warned of this when he spoke of individuation, the process by which a person becomes whole, distinct, and true to themselves. Jung argued that becoming who you truly are requires pulling away from the collective mindset, stepping out of inherited roles, and listening to the quiet voice within. But that voice is subtle, and the more you open yourself up to external noise, the harder it becomes to hear it. Too many opinions can crowd out your inner wisdom, and when clarity is replaced by confusion, you begin to hesitate, not because you don't believe in your dream, but because you've allowed others to think for you. When you're building something sacred, you must protect the blueprint. A dream is more than just a plan. It is a spiritual compass, a message from the unconscious pointing you toward growth. And growth by nature is not a democratic process. It doesn't require votes. It requires vision. Not consensus, but conviction. But we live in an age where everyone has an opinion, and worse, where we've been conditioned to seek them out constantly. Validation has become a substitute for vision. We want someone to co-sign our direction before we dare take the first step. But the truth is, if your dream needs approval before it begins, it will never survive what it takes to manifest. You cannot create from a place of dilution. Every time you reshape your dream to make it more palatable to others, you lose a piece of its original fire. You trade vision for acceptability, and eventually you start asking the wrong questions. Will people support this? Will they understand it? Will they agree with me? But these aren't the questions of a visionary. They're the questions of someone who's already begun to drift from their path. Even well-meaning advice can mislead. People may love you deeply, but still not understand where you're going, because they haven't been given your blueprint. They haven't been called the way you've been called. Their perspective is limited not by ill intention, but by their own journey. And when you try to build your dream from someone else's lens, you may succeed in making it safer, more acceptable, but it will no longer be yours. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." It's in that inward gaze that real clarity is born. When you stop explaining, stop defending, stop needing to be understood, you start to hear your own voice again. And that voice doesn't always sound like excitement. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it is always honest. And clarity, real clarity, often comes in the absence of noise. This is where silence becomes a psychological tool. It becomes the space where confusion clears, where your energy stops being fragmented across conversations and returns to center. You no longer need to discuss every idea, debate every move, justify every intention. Instead, you begin to protect your mental focus like a sacred flame. You realize that not every brainstorm needs an audience. Not every decision needs a panel. Some of your most profound breakthroughs will come in solitude, when your mind is no longer trying to accommodate the opinions of the room. You're not being rude by withholding your vision. You're being wise. You're creating a boundary not out of secrecy, but out of respect for the process, for your peace, for the timing. And in time, your clarity will give rise to results. The world may not understand your silence now, but it will recognize your outcome later. The work will speak, the transformation will reveal itself, and the same voices that once offered confusion will fall quiet. Not because they were silenced, but because your clarity no longer requires their noise. So protect your clarity the way an artist protects a blank canvas. From careless strokes, from rushed hands, from outside influence. Let your dream take shape in peace, in depth, in the quiet alignment between who you are and who you're becoming. Because when your dream is built on your voice alone, you won't need to explain it. You'll simply live it. There is a quiet strength that comes when you stop announcing your every move. In a culture that values visibility over depth, we're often told that if people can't see what you're doing, it must not be real. That if you're not talking about your process, if you're not documenting every step, then you're not progressing. But the opposite is often true. Silence isn't the absence of motion. It is the presence of focus. It is what happens when you stop performing and start becoming. When you choose to stay silent about your dreams, your goals, your transformation, what you're really doing is preserving your energy. You are choosing not to spend your mental and emotional resources on proving, defending, or broadcasting something that is still taking shape. You understand that the more you speak, the more you disperse that energy outward. And every time you speak too soon, you give pieces of that dream away. Little by little, word by word, until there's not enough left to act on. But when you hold it in, when you let your vision deepen in silence, you begin building something far more powerful than applause. Momentum. Carl Jung taught that real transformation happens in the unconscious before it emerges into the visible world. It brews quietly in the dark, like roots growing beneath the surface before the tree breaks through the soil. If you interrupt that process, if you expose it too soon, you rob it of the time and stillness it needs to truly grow. Silence gives your dream that space. It allows you to work undisturbed, free from the distortion of praise or the distraction of doubt. You're no longer trying to shape your journey for an audience, you're shaping it for your soul. And here's the beauty of it. The more silent you are, the more potent your presence becomes. People begin to notice something has changed, even if you've said nothing. You move differently, your habits evolve, your energy becomes cleaner, sharper, more intentional. And what you don't say begins to speak louder than what you used to shout. There is a kind of dignity in that, an authority that doesn't need to be declared. It just is. When your results start speaking for you, the dynamic shifts. You no longer chase validation. You no longer seek confirmation because you've built something that stands on its own. The foundation is real. The progress is tangible. You're not talking about what you're going to do. You're doing it quietly, consistently, and that kind of power cannot be faked. It cannot be manufactured through aesthetics or status updates. It is earned in the silence, through discipline, through alignment, through the long hours no one sees. But make no mistake, silence doesn't mean isolation. It means discernment. It means knowing who deserves access to your process and who doesn't. It means choosing to invest in action rather than applause. It means becoming so focused, so internally anchored that the need to be seen is replaced by the need to be true. That's the shift. That's when everything changes, because once you begin moving from that place, the results become inevitable. Eventually, your transformation becomes undeniable, not because you announced it, but because you embodied it. Not because you convinced anyone, but because you no longer needed to. And the same people who once overlooked you, doubted you, dismissed you, they'll begin to notice, but by then, their recognition will no longer matter. Because your glow up was never about being seen, it was about being whole. And that's the paradox. The more silent you become, the louder your impact grows. The more inward your focus, the more outward your results. You don't have to declare your dreams when you're already living them. You don't have to explain your path when your presence reveals the work you've done. So, stay quiet, stay focused. Let your silence hold space for what you're building. Let your discipline speak in actions, not words. Let your energy declare what your mouth no longer needs to. Because when the work is real, it echoes, even in silence.